It is the rare observer who questions from where the dollar we use so often comes. Many assume it to be ordained by government, when in reality, this is a gross oversimplification. The true and far more outreaching process by which money is created surrounds itself around one private institution, the Federal Reserve. Although few know even of its existence, let alone of its operations, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 continues to be the most influential bill on the economy in the last century. The Federal Reserve, from the conflict and compromise within its foundation to the policy it enacts today, has created America's economic prowess, but also her economic despair, by the issuance of a debt-backed currency. By this practice, the Federal Reserve has existed as deeply flawed but necessary to the economy.
It is 1907. After failed speculation in the stock market, the owners of major financial institutions are nearly bankrupt. The public, in a mass panic, attempts to withdraw all of their money from their banks at once. The banks, because of risky lending practices, do not have their depositors' money at hand. From Wall Street to Main Street, America is in shock as the people find that what they had in their deposit accounts yesterday is no more. From this conflict, which nearly collapsed the entire economy, the desire for a central bank to ensure local banks was born. A desire that would come to fruition in a compromise that would define monetary policy for the next century. In 1910, 6 heads of industry, Nelson Aldrich, Piatt Andrew, Henry Davison, Arthur Shelton, Frank Vanderlip, and Paul Warburg traveled secretly and under the cover of night to Jekyll Island. Their intention was secretive, but of greater importance than anything that these men of capitalism had done before. They would make their conference to draft a central banking bill to Congress. The bill the bankers agreed upon would be called the Aldrich Plan. Yet even these powerful men could not anticipate the struggle soon to occur as their bill passed through the graveyard of policy, Congress. If pro is the opposite of con, what is the opposite of progress? Paul Harvey's statement would soon find itself being proven correct. To the Democrats, led by William Jenners in the Senate, the central private bank was a gross tyranny upon the American people. Meanwhile, Republicans rallied in support of an insurance policy for the economy. The issue was quickly split among party lines. Democrats alleged that the bill would establish a money trust wherein a corrupt few would control the money supply with little competition in the market. They saw the crafting of the bill primarily by bankers as inherent bias in judgment. Republicans retorted that the banks, left controlled by public institutions, would be ineffective in establishing real change in the American economy, that a private bank was the only option for providing stability for the often extreme lending practices of the banks. Meanwhile, the National Monetary Committee, originally issued with the task of creating the central bank, devolved into distrust and disillusion. Passionate arguments from both sides were made throughout years of frustrating disagreement. The president, Woodrow Wilson, furious at the lack of progress, disallowed Congress to adjourn until a settlement could be made, and held caucuses from 10 in the morning to 11 in the night. Yet still, even while working day and night, Congress could not agree. By 1913, 3 years after the Aldrich Plan had been proposed, many believed that there would never be a central bank.
However, a determined senator from Virginia, Senator Carter Glass, and an economist from Washington and Lee University, Parker Willis, would soon alter the doomed fate of the bill. Glass and Willis understood that little would be accomplished should Congress operate as it had been for the past few years, and realized the opportunity to appease both sides. Combining advisement from both Republicans and Democrats with personal expertise on economy, they proposed to Woodrow Wilson the Glass-Willis proposal. The new proposal was innovative in its compromise. It allowed the National Central Bank to be operated privately by stockholders, while local branches would be spread throughout the country and operated by governments. It was a perfect blend of the two views. The Democrats felt that there was little room for abuse of the public, as the local banks could ensure fair policy, while Republicans and bankers alike saw the control of the national interest rates to be enough to stabilize the economy. An embattled but satisfied Congress renamed and passed this proposition, and on December 23rd of 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act. Despite these great efforts, the compromise in the Federal Reserve's inception cannot be described as being fully good nor bad. One must look to the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve, as detailed in modern monetary mechanics, to understand this sentiment.
Under the Federal Reserve Act, when the United States government runs a deficit, it takes loans from the Federal Reserve. When these loans are made, the Federal Reserve does not use pre-existing currency. Rather, the Federal Reserve loans the government with money that it creates out of nothing. As Congressman Wright Patman once remarked, the Federal Reserve Bank buys government bonds without 1 penny. When the government receives this newly created money, they put it in a bank. Banks under the Federal Reserve Act are allowed to loan out 90% of what they hold in deposits. However, when they make loans, they do not literally take money out of their depositors' accounts to pay for these loans. Rather, they credit the loaner's account with money created out of nothing. If the initial payment is loaned out at a rate of 90% and the loan does not detract from the depositor's account, this money that is loaned out is new legal currency. Commercial banks create checkbook money whenever they grant a loan, simply by adding new depositor dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The process doesn't end here. The people and businesses who receive the loan deposit their money in a bank. The bank now loans this money as well at a 90% rate. This repeats itself so that mathematically $100 deposited into banks as new currency becomes $1,000 under the fractional reserve banking system. Most of our currency is created in this manner, by commercial banks and not by government institutions. As of today, 96% of our currency supply is this type of money created by debt.
You said there's like a fractional element to this. You increase the money reserves by 100, the multiplier is 10, the money supply goes up by 1,000. Well, the multiplier works in reverse. You take 100 out, and all of a sudden there'll be 1,000 less. Okay, will there be defaults and stuff like that? Absolutely. Okay, because a lot of people finance their operations through debt.
The fractional reserve banking system is important to the economy in allowing banks to loan out the money held in its depositors' accounts. The use of loans to build new infrastructure has been a mainstay of economic growth in the 20th and 21st century. With the inability to receive loans, companies in the last century would have grown at a stagnant pace. Innovative technologies that have defined the modern world, such as the iPhone, the personal computer, the television, and more, never could have been commercially viable without the ability to receive capital from financial institutions. Especially in the Federal Reserve's function of keeping the value of the dollar stable, it is vital to the economy. Without the Federal Reserve, it would be impossible to determine how much a dollar is worth in daily transactions due to constantly fluctuating prices.
Despite it being needed in the economy, the Federal Reserve is not without its deficiencies. Because all money in circulation is created through loans, debt is inherent to United States monetary policy. Consider this: for every dollar created, more than $1 plus interest is added to the debt. When comparing the M3 money supply to the national debt, it becomes evident that debt is not a side effect of money, but that money is in fact debt.
Because there's many different kinds of money. There's the different M's, M1, et cetera, et cetera. So a big chunk of money is created by the government issuing money, and piles of other money, in air quotes here, is just debt. It's just private debt. It's my credit card. Like, I have a credit card. I go and I buy a bunch of stuff, and I have the stuff. And I owe the credit card company some money for some month, and then I pay that off. And billions and billions and trillions of dollars in the world are created in this way. And is the government involved? Well, yes and no.
Because of this perplexing relationship between debt and money, when debts are paid off, money disappears. In essence, if all participants in the economy paid off their debts, there would be no money in circulation. Therefore, it is impossible to reduce the national debt. The economy that stands today is founded on the same compromise that must eventually be its demise. There is no known alternative to the monetary policy the Federal Reserve has implemented that would create economic growth without creating debt. That currency must be made with debt to create economic growth is an issue that humanity must remedy before the flaws of our economy cause financial ruin. As Robert H. Hamphil of the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank put it, we are completely dependent on the commercial banks. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation, cash or credit. If the banks create ample synthetic money, we are prosperous. If not, we starve. It is so important that our present civilization may collapse unless it becomes widely understood and the defects remedied very soon.